Hey there, art nerds! I'm back at you with another Supervision Supergranulating field test. I want to see how well these will work out for my comic art. So to do that, I have created a bunch of really cute individual little illustrations, and I'm going to use one of each of the supergranulating colors from Supervision and Paul Rubens with each of these individual illustrations to see how well those work as atmospheric or background colors. So this took a lot of drawing, inking, painting, and patience, but I'm looking forward to sharing my results with you guys today. So here is my combined supergranulating palette for all of my CAAM supergranulating colors, both the tubes that have been dried into half pans as well as the half pans themselves. If you guys are interested in my other supergranulating reviews, you guys can find information about that down in the description below. I'm also going to have links where you can buy these if you're interested in accruing them for your own dragon hoard of watercolor supplies, as well as my show notes. Now, having played around with these kind of watercolors, I have found that there are a few techniques that really bring out that supergranulation. Namely, they work best wet into wet and then just giving them plenty of time to dry. So before I dive too deep into this field test, I want to talk to you guys about something that's honestly really important and is going to drastically affect whether these paints are useful to you or not. It was brought to my attention that Supervision's supergranulating watercolors are also super fugitive, not only on paper, but in the tube as well. For more information on that, I've linked another YouTube artist review on Amazon, as well as her video in the description. So Kimberly Crick Art has some legitimate, serious concerns about these paints that I think are well worth considering and well worth keeping in mind when you're trying to decide whether or not these are useful for you. Her complaints include color fugitivity on paper for anything displayed on a wall with reasonable precautions taken, which is bad enough, but not necessarily a concern for someone painting for a reproduction like myself, as well as color fugitivity in the tube, which to me is unforgivable. When you buy watercolors, they should stay relatively good while still in the tube for, I would say, at least 2 years is pretty fair. I mean, I would love it if they stayed good indefinitely, but that is not necessarily a reasonable expectation. But she noticed color shifts really quickly, like within the first year. So to me, that is a really big deal. Now, me personally, I have not experienced these issues utilizing the tube colors. Now, I do dry them out into half pans and I have not experienced the color shift at all. I haven't necessarily revisited the colors from the tubes, so I might go back to some of the more egregious colors and see if that's an issue. But my art is also not up on display. It was kept in a shut portfolio in between recordings. Now, I thought these concerns were alarming enough to lead the video with, and while I still enjoy the Supervision supergranulating watercolors, as well as many other brands supergranulating watercolors, I think y'all should be aware of these concerns and have the information necessary to make informed decisions regarding the art supplies you use to make art, for comics, reproduction, or even to sell. I would not sell any piece that utilizes these supergranulating watercolors because Kimberly's concerns, it seemed like her art was displayed in very reasonable conditions. There should have been no color shift, but there was color shift, and I just cannot feel good selling a piece of art that color shifts that quickly. And I do also sell alcohol marker originals, but I do disclose to my customers that alcohol markers are light fugitive and they should be displayed correctly. I would say the color fugitivity is even worse than what you would see with alcohol markers, with the exception of like hot pinks. Those tend to give up the ghost really quick, regardless of the medium. So I'm not going to sell any piece that has used these particular supergranulating colors. Now, I do also really like the Daniel Smith colors, and I think the Schminke colors are really pretty, but I haven't had a chance to use those yet, and it has not yet been brought to my attention that those have significant light fast and color shift issues, so I'm not really worried about those right now. Now, I purchased these for comic backgrounds, and I don't sell my comic originals, but I would advise you guys to take similar precautions. And I just wanted to put this out there because I think you guys deserve to have this information. And companies are not always very forthright about this kind of information. So while I do have a Patreon goal to do a massive year-long outdoor light fast test, I'm not currently interested in doing light fast testing outside of that, as most of my art is made for reproduction. That said, I'm always interested in other people's findings on light fastness, particularly when the company is a bit coy about it. And most of the Supervision supergranulating colors are listed as outlist, which I don't know what that means, but I guess that means not light fast. So I've also been informed that Supervision and Paul Rubens operate under the same company. So until further notice, I think it's safe to assume that the Paul Rubens supergranulating colors that I'm also going to review in this video have the same issues as the Supervision watercolors. So thanks Mailelani for bringing that to my attention. I really appreciate it. It's also something that the companies tend to be very coy about, who owns who and who manufactures what. So I appreciate you sharing that information with me so I can share that with more people. So these little field tests that I am sketching and inking for you guys, they were done like 3 per day, and they were done on the Mailelani watercolor rounds, which are like 25% cotton and the rest of it is cellulose. And it's not necessarily because I think that's just such a great paper. It's kind of because I did the initial set of field tests on this paper, and it's also because it kind of reminds me of some of the working properties of Canson-Montval. And Canson-Montval is what I paint 7-inch Cara, my watercolor comic on. So I thought it was fairly similar. Also, I am just a sucker for cute, round little watercolor illustrations. So that would be the other reason. I am also using, dang it, sorry about that. Sorry, I'm both ad-libbing and working from Shownotes, and I couldn't find what I was looking for. So I'm also using an HB mechanical pencil. I'm inking these with a Sakura Pigment FB, and I'm going to be painting these with the silver Black Velvet watercolor brushes that you guys see me use all the time. Now, kind of a downside is, although I initially didn't really like the Mailelani watercolor rounds, I enjoy them for these field tests, and I can't find them anymore, or at least not the ones that are loose in that little tin. I do have one of their blocks. I'm kind of debating whether or not I can actually share that on YouTube because there's some artistic nudity in it. What I might do is just put a post-it on it for YouTube and have the full version up on my Patreon, and that way I'm not, you know, possibly offending any younger viewers. I didn't get to pick the cover. They sent me a random cover, and of the covers, the 4 covers they have, they sent the one I can't show on YouTube. So if I do actually do a review of that watercolor round block, I'm just going to handle it like that. And it's probably the same paper. I did order some little mini Door Arts rounds, similar to the block that I have, but I think they're just loose. I wish they were like I don't normally like mixed fiber papers. I usually say mixed fiber papers are the worst of both fibers. But I got used to the Mailelani rounds, and I was just, you know, hoping to buy another pack of them so I could finish off all my supergranulating tests and do a bunch of the Daniel Smith and maybe some of the Schminke ones on that. But I can't find them anymore, so I'm probably going to switch to the Paul Rubens mini round when I review the Supervision Chameleon and Mica, the Rock plus Mica watercolors, which honestly are also probably very light fugitive. Like I said, I'm in general not, I don't mind sharing that information, but I'm not necessarily interested in doing a bunch of light fast testing currently with what setup I would have right now. So most of my work is stored in portfolios when I'm not either selling it or it's up on my walls, because most of the art that I make is meant for reproduction. So it's meant to be turned into comic book pages or stickers or postcards. I don't I mean, while I love making originals, that isn't my primary use case to make this original to sell. So it wasn't necessarily like my first thought, especially with the super granulating colors. I was more interested in their interesting properties and how they might work on comic pages. And I do still think they have a lot of potential for use on comic pages. I still think that could be an interesting avenue to use them, especially if you're not going to display those comic pages on a wall in a room that gets any kind of sun. You know, that's why it's important to talk about for reproduction versus for display versus for sale. If something is made for reproduction, historically, comic pages were painted with these really light fugitive dye based watercolors, like radiant watercolors, which are very light fugitive. So that wasn't really the main concern. Now that said, a lot of those original pages do not look nearly as beautiful as they used to look when they were first painted. But the artist's goal wasn't to create this beautiful comic page that could be displayed as an original. It was to create this thing for reproduction. And a lot of when I'm painting Kara, while I love having these pages to display and have in a portfolio and show to people and get to talk to people about it. Like I literally have a bunch of Kara pages up in a glass display case at my local library right now. I don't normally think about, are these going to still be 100% color accurate in 25 years? Because that isn't my end product. My end product are either the scans that I've then color corrected and lettered, and those are more finished pieces of art, or the book itself, which is the consumer product. That's the product I'm actually going to sell. So I do think the like fast concerns are super valid. That's why I wanted to share them with you guys. I think they're really important. I am disappointed, but not surprised. I mean, given the nature of supergranulation, I'm 100% not surprised that dyes were used to get those staining colors. It doesn't surprise me though, and it doesn't really like throw me for a loop, but I am kind of disappointed because I thought they had a lot of really interesting applications, and I'm really grateful that other artists did take that time to light fast test them and leave such a thorough review, not only online, but over on Amazon, because that answers a lot of questions that the companies should be answering, that many of them are not very forthcoming. A lot of these companies are not 100% honest about what pigments they're using or how long these paints will last, and that makes it harder to be an artist because you are hoping that they're selling you professional quality art supplies and that you can then in turn perhaps sell the art that you made with it to a customer in good conscience, and you spent all this time making a nice piece of art that you think looks good and you want to find a home for, only to find out that you can't in good faith sell that piece of art because it's going to basically fall apart. It's going to lose what makes it beautiful, its color, in a very short period of time. And if you're an artist who sells a lot of their art, their originals, you're now out a source of income, and that is pain that could have been saved if the company had just been forthcoming about that information from the get-go. So while I still I think the super granulating colors are really neat. I think it's a fun concept. I'm still going to keep playing with them. I think for art for reproduction, it has a lot to offer. I'm kind of disappointed because it has now limited the customer base to people who are not going to be selling that art. And as artists, we often have to find as many income streams as possible to make a living. Like, I sell originals, I do YouTube, I teach, I make comics, and having an income stream kind of removed from you after you've made the art, that's kind of disappointing. So I would really like to see more art supply companies do better about being honest, about communicating what their materials are with artists. So anyway, all that said, now we can finally start field testing them. So what I'm going to do with this is I am going to apply our super granulating color wet into wet first, allow it to dry fully, and then I'm going to batch paint all of these, much like I would batch paint a watercolor comic page. And if you guys are interested in my comic making process, I've got you so covered. I've got so many great playlists on how to make comics here on the channel. I'll link those for you guys. And I'm actually working on getting back to making writing comics, working on chapter 9. I'm really excited about it, and I look forward to sharing that process with you guys here on YouTube. I'm going to do a big old vlog rather than sharing each individual step, because I've got a bunch of tutorials on that. I'm going to do a vlog on making chapter 9 and share it with you guys when chapter 9 is done. So I'm looking forward to that as well. So I started with lavender, which uses PW6, PR122, and PB29. It is series 1. It says it is a light fastness of 5, which now I kind of wonder about. It is semi-opaque. Next, I'm going to be using Crimson Purple, which uses PB29, PR122, and PBR6, as well as probably some undisclosed dyes. It is a series 1. It claims to have a light fastness of 7, but again, now that's in doubt. It is semi-opaque. And if any of you guys have done light fast testing at home on the colors that I'm mentioning today, I did read that the half pans supposedly perform a little bit better in terms of light fastness than the tube watercolors. So hopefully most of the colors we're going to be talking about today, with the exception of 2 Supervision and all 4 of the Paul Rubens are half pans. So hopefully the half pans won't have as many problems as the tubes. But if you guys have different experiences than I do, if you have had light fast issues, please do let me know so that I can pin your comment and so more people have more information. So next is going to be Royal Purple, which is supposedly PB29 and PR122. It is series 1. It is supposedly a light fast rating of 7 with a semi-opaque transparency. And that's another thing. When companies are not 100% honest about the materials and the light fast information they use, that kind of casts all of their products into a questionable position, and it really makes you hesitate as an artist to use those, because you no longer can really trust that the products are going to stand up to what you need them to stand up to. So if I seem like I'm harping a little bit, it's really because I'm kind of shook, and I'm very disappointed, because that is a few months is a ridiculously short amount of time for something to retain its color. Next is Sky Ink. It uses PB17 mineral color, and we all know it's using something else in there because this color does granulate out into a couple of different colors. It is a series 1. It is a light fast rating of 6, and it is semi-opaque. Next is Dark Green, which is PG29 and PG7. It is series 1. It has a light fastness of supposedly 7, and it is semi-opaque. So most of these half pan watercolors have like a really first of all, light fast ratings are weird because different companies have different stars to indicate different things. They're not really that consistent, and it seems like Supervision has their own light fast scale as well. So I'm only assuming that the higher the number, the better the light fastness is. But people doing these sort of light fast tests at home, which isn't even the same as, so Daniel Smith has this machine that basically blasts a color on a piece of paper with a huge amount of light so that you can do many years of light damage in only a few hours. And that's really the way to do it if you can afford such an expensive piece of equipment. But what many artists do when they're testing at home is they paint a swatch, they block off half of it with heavy tape or heavy paper so that light can't reach it, and then they put it in the window and they leave it in the window, a window that gets a lot of sun, for several months. And that can be a great way to light fast test. It's very practical because it kind of simulates conditions that would be found in a home when art is on display. They do sell glass that is UV resistant. They sell UV resistant bags. So you can take precautions, but something concerning about these is even with proper precautions taken, they still faded, which means they are incredibly fugitive. So the next color is blue black with PB29, PBR6, PY43. It is a series 1 with a light fastness of 7, and it is semi-opaque. Now, what I don't understand is that you don't have to use dye colors to get the sort of finely granulated staining colors that you might want for a super granulating situation like this, nor do you need to use additives to get super granulating colors. There are plenty of minerals that granulate more than others, and there are plenty of synthetic colors that are more staining than others without being as fugitive as dye-based colors. I mean, dye-based colors are generally very fugitive. So I don't really understand why they would take the cheap route when there are good, more permanent routes that can be taken. It's just disappointing. So the next color is Tang Kiln, PB29 and PY43, Series 1 with a light fast rating of 7, and it is semi-opaque. In fact, I think all of these colors are rated as semi-opaque. But it certainly brings up a lot of unanswered questions that I don't know that I can answer for you guys. I kind of wish I could. So now we're going into some of my new tubes of watercolor. So they're both CAAM tubes. One of them is yellow green. This is one of the really fugitive ones. It is PB17 and plant extracts. It is transparent and its light fastness is rated as outlist. I use it in a half pan, and I have not noticed color shifts working from a half pan, but again, I haven't done any light fast testing on the paper itself. The other new color that I'm trying out is red green. It is a series 4. It uses PG50 and PR122. It is semi-opaque and its light fast is also rated as outlist. So this is going to be one of the more problem colors, which is a shame because some of the really fun color splits that give you Brusho-like effects are the most problematic. That said, Brusho, which I also love, is a dye-based watercolor, which is also very light fugitive. And I used to do convention commissions using Brusho, and I would always warn my customers that these pieces, which were very inexpensive little watercolor pieces, are probably going to fade over time, to display them in a low light situation, and just to keep in mind that they are probably going to fade. But they were also priced very affordably. So, and I did usually try to make sure that my customers were aware of those kind of conditions. So to me, Brusho is also, I love Brusho, and this is like an easier form of Brusho, but Brusho is also guilty of the same thing. So again, I'm not really surprised. So now we're going on to the Paul Rubens supergranulating colors. We're starting with Royal Purple, which is a beautiful color. It is PV18 and PB29. It is semi-transparent. And oh, hey, we have a different light fast rating of 4 pluses, which means what? You would think, because they're made by the same company, they would possibly have the same light fast scale so that we could at least compare apples to apples, but they do not. Next is going to be, I believe, this is Shadow Violet. And Shadow Violet is PB18 and PB29. It is listed as transparent, and it is 5 pluses of light fastness. See what I mean? Oh, I wish they would come up with I wish watercolor companies would come up with a consistent light fast scale, because it really makes it hard to figure out just how long a watercolor is going to last. But I'm sure maybe some intrepid watercolor YouTuber, art tuber who has more time and space than I do and can afford to do so might do a massive test. I mean, that is one of my Patreon goals. I would love to do that, but it requires a lot of equipment and time, and I want to test like everything, including alcohol markers. So that's why it's kind of set at a higher price point, and I want to do it for at least a year with frequent check-ins. So if that sounds like your jam, that is a community goal over on my Patreon that might be well worth supporting, especially as I've been reviewing a lot of student grade watercolors. It could be a good opportunity to really test out some of the student grade and special effects watercolors to see if they're really up to snuff. So next is Christmas Green, which is PBR 7 and PB 15. It is transparent with a light fast rating of 5 stars. And then if I did that giant light fast test, we could come up with our own light fast scale, and I could just code everything I have against that scale. So at least then we would have a system of comparison. And obviously, I would make a huge spreadsheet and put it up on Patreon, and also maybe make a website for it so that more people can access it, so that we could maybe have like a more consistent color code. And I have information on my plans for that written up over on my Patreon if you're curious about it. And if there's a lot of interest in how I'd go about doing it, I have zero problem making a video and explaining what my goals for that are. But for me, since that's so time consuming, it's definitely something that I do have to kind of attach a price to and say, if we raise this much money, then I can justify doing this. So next is going to be Moonlight Purple, which is PO73, PB29, and PG18. It is transparent with a light fast rating of 5+ marks. And this is the one that really makes me think of Brusho's Black, because we've got all these pretty colors that granulate out when you let this go wet into wet. I mean, there's oranges in there, there's blues in there, there's greens in there. This also kind of makes me, I mean, if we're going to be playing around with fugitive color anyway, if our color has a shelf life and we can only enjoy it for so long anyway, as is much of life, but should always be disclosed, it makes me really want to play around with some fun stuff regarding custom watercolors. I mean, they would all be like special effects, in a way, use at your own risk, because they probably would be very fugitive, but it would be really fun to do some really wild stuff with mix-ins that kind of release different colors as we activate them. So, I mean, I do find the fugitivity issues to be very disappointing and disheartening, but I also find it kind of freeing in a way, because it's like, well, okay, if these are going to do this anyway, I might as well make some real wild stuff and have fun with it, and just be totally honest that if you're going to use the wild stuff that I'm making, it's probably for reproduction and not for art that you're going to sell, because there's a whole world of art that's not really just, it's just art for art's sake, art for enjoyment's sake, art for play's sake. A lot of hobby art supplies are not going to stand up for 5 years. So there's a whole arena of art for play. And I think as long as we're honest that these art supplies are not going to stand up to the test of time, and we're honest with our customers or the people using these art supplies, then to me there's no real conflict. The conflict comes from the lack of information and the fact that somebody had to test this out to find out that it fell short of the bar. That's kind of where the problem lies for me. So we have a bunch of these cute granulating watercolor rounds on our Mailelani watercolor paper. They are not quite done, although the field test part of this is basically done, because next I want to batch paint these, because that's a big part of would these work for watercolor comics, is how quick are these to reactivate, how quick are they to bleed into the additional colors, are they going to allow me to paint the characters, or are they going to cause a whole bunch of new problems? Because as a watercolor comic artist, what I care about the most is the ability to paint watercolor comics. So this is a reminder that this is a test to see how these might look for watercolor comic panels for mood and emphasis. My comic pages are generally not on display in my house, and they live in either a portfolio or in archival boxes. And my end goal is reproduction, a watercolor webcomic, and a book. Knowing how fugitive these paints are, I'm sort of on the fence about using these for comics now. I probably will when it's relevant, but I won't go out of my way to utilize these if it's not necessary for emphasis. So I have a whole lot of these to batch paint. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to basically split them up between the CAAM Supervision colors and the Paul Rubens colors, and each of the two sets are going to go on a different gator board. It's going to be very challenging to record this because I'm going to have to move the camera way out to capture everything, but I'm going to do my best, and it's going to basically convey the major point of, working in batch. And this isn't something I'm not familiar with. When I'm painting watercolor comic pages, I'm usually painting a scene at a time, which can be anywhere from 4 to 6 pages, and that's not easy to record either. So generally I don't, and I'm usually, swapping between gator boards as I paint. So it's just kind of one of the things you deal with when you're painting in batch. Something that is different in this instance is, well, A, these aren't comic pages, they're just individual little mini illustrations of Kara, and B, I'm not stretching these, I'm taping them down using MT's white washi tape, which I found that I really like and enjoy using for masking and for taping things down. So I recommend it if you're looking for kind of a good workhorse washi tape for that purposes and you don't mind spending a little bit of extra money. So while I love that painting in batch allows me to paint a lot of something in a relatively short period of time, because you're basically utilizing the same shared colors over and over and over again. For example, right now I'm painting everything that's white, so all of the whites of Kara's eyes, anything in the illustration that might just be a very stark plain white, I'm going ahead and painting that now. All of Kara's skin tone gets painted in one go, and you kind of save all the unique things, so like the different clothing, for the end when you're not kind of painting 16 of the same. It can be kind of tedious and kind of boring and kind of monotonous, but what I really like is it enables me to paint a watercolor comic and have kind of the same color schemes consistent throughout the scene. And it's not fun to watch, but it's not bad to do, if that makes sense. So I'm not trying to advocate one way or the other for how, if you want to make a watercolor comic, how you should go about doing it. But painting in batch is a method that works well for me, and it has enabled me to paint hundreds of watercolor comic pages over time, and it's allowed me to get 2 books of watercolor comics out. So it's a method that works for me. But as you guys can see, it is not the most entertaining to watch, and I have to really move the camera back. So my face, my arms, they're gonna get in the shot. I apologize for that. There's only so much that I can pull in and crop without losing a lot of the whole. So this is basically what I do, and what I do that makes me a little bit different from a lot of the other watercolor art tubers here on YouTube. I paint watercolor comics. I paint them in batch, which means I'm trying to paint them quickly and for reproduction. My thought isn't to sell these pages. My thought isn't for the individual pages themselves to be so beautiful as standalone illustrations that they're going to just sell as individual illustrations. I am making components of a whole, that the whole itself is what's meant to be judged, not the individual components. So I think that kind of gives me a different viewpoint on watercolors and on the art supplies that I use, because I'm using them to kind of mass produce comic pages, because that's what comic artists do. We have to mass produce comic pages in order to make a 100-page book or a 200-page book or a series that includes multiple books. You're mass producing this art. And I've come from a background where I think art should be egalitarian. I think art should be fairly affordable. I would rather people have a more affordable original from me than, Walmart prints up in their house. Ideally, I've tried to always work within that guidelines. When I was in college, I did a lot of digital art and I did a lot of traditional printmaking, because printmaking is kind of a more affordable way for people to own original art, something that someone made themselves rather than something printed out by a computer or printed out by a mass market machine. When I really fell in love with comics, I fell in love with zines shortly after, and mini comics, and I really love how that's something anyone or almost anyone can do if you can get your booty over to a library or to a Kinko's, or if you have a printer at your house. It's a very grassroots, accessible art form, and I am very anti-fine art. I'm very anti high-priced art. I mean, you do you. I'm not here to yuck your yum or rain on your parade, but my own personal motto is that art and illustration are so wonderful and transformative and freeing. They are the keys that unlocked my heart, and they allow me to communicate with people. I want to make it something that anyone who has the desire can pursue. And I've tried to do that almost every day of my life since adulthood, every step of the way, from the blog that I used to run, to this YouTube channel, to comic pages, to doing workshops with the library, to teaching at conventions. I want art, the making of art, the telling of stories, to be something that's more accessible to more people. So even though I paid all this money to go to SCAD and get a master's degree in sequential art, I really wanted to take everything I learned and everything I learned in the school of life and everything I've learned through my experiences and everything I've had to fight for and read about and study about, and share it as much as possible with other people, so that I could kind of demystify it and make it something that's accessible to more people. So for me, my love of comics, I love telling stories and I love communicating, and I have all these things that I want to say to people, all these hopeful, kind things, and comics are a way that I can kind of share the best of my heart and the best of my intentions with people without leaving myself just totally vulnerable. Although, to be real, comics leaves you very vulnerable. If you make a comic that you really believe in and you really love, and it is not well received or no one cares, you do feel very vulnerable. That it is only marginally less intimidating than saying all of these things barefaced to people. But I find that people can be more receptive to these sort of messages of kindness and love and inclusivity when it's in a comic form than just hearing somebody say it. So making comics is my skin in the game. I've spent so many hours doing this, so many years of my life doing this. So that's something that, for a while I've kind of moved away from making comics because I went through this really bad depressive spell. And I had a lot of self-doubt and a lot of self-hatred, and just the idea of making comics was just this depressing, overwhelming thing. And I just really had it in my head that no one cared and it didn't matter what I did, and then I should just give up and go away. But I still kept that in my heart. I was 2 books in, I still kept the hope in my heart, and I still tried to keep that little ember of hope in my heart. And now I'm working on building that ember back up into a fire so that I can get back into making comics and kind of revising my relationship with comics and what I'm trying to do and who I'm trying to reach and how I'm trying to do that, and trying to have just a healthier relationship with what I make versus how it's received online. And I can't say that I've ever had a terrible backlash. No one has ever just come gunning for me, but my work has not necessarily found the people I would have liked for it to have found. And I have to just be okay with that. And I have to just be okay, because in my heart, I still love making comics. I still love telling stories. I still love painting. And I still really believe in 7-inch Kara and what I want to do with 7-inch Kara. So I have to kind of get past the fact that the first 2 books just didn't help me find my place in the community that I'd hoped that it would. It didn't gain me the friends that I'd hoped it would gain. It didn't net me the respect. And when I say respect, I literally just mean people being like cordial to me. It didn't net me that either. Nor did the outreach or the education that I've tried to do. And I have to just be okay with that. Like, okay, it didn't do those things. That's fine. Like, I still believe in the comic, and I still believe in making comics, and I still want to make comics. And if it doesn't mean anything to these people, that's fine, because it means something to me, and it means something to these other people. And I had to just kind of like retool my expectations and retool how I feel about it, and just come at it from a different angle. And I don't mean to sound entitled. I really hope I don't. I feel like anybody who has known me, even just online known me for a significant amount of time, knows that I try really hard, and I generally love really fiercely, and I try to give everything 100%, which you can't. You can't give everything 100%, but I have ADHD and I don't know when to call it quits. So I give everything as much as I can. So it's not like I am trying to cash in this check that I just haven't done the work for. But not everything you do is going to have the results that you want it to have. It's not everything you're going to do is going to mean what you want it to mean to other people. You make a thing and you put your best into it, and then you release it, and it's going to mean whatever it's going to mean to whoever reads it. They're going to take whatever, because they're reading it with lenses crafted by their life. They're going to see what you make through the lens of their own experiences. And sometimes you have shared experiences and you can kind of hit a resonance with the reader, and that's amazing. Or sometimes you can kind of unlock something in them and they see things with a new set of eyes, and that's amazing. And sometimes you don't. Sometimes they just don't have the right combination of experiences, or you just don't have the right combination. So the work that you made isn't the key to their heart. And not every piece of work is going to be the key to everybody's heart. And that kind of makes it even more special when it is, when it clicks. There was this comic, Kiwis by Beat, by this guy, Copy Rezo, and it was a web comic, and I read it in late high school and college, and I loved it. And no one I knew had read it. None of my online friends read it. None of my in real life friends read it. Like, it was me reading Kiwis by Beat. And I mean, I would mention it to online friends over the years, and most of them didn't know at all what I was talking about. And then finally, one of my friends was like, yeah, I know what you're talking about. I didn't read that one, but I read his follow-up comic. Like, and this is after mentioning this comic to like 100 people. I mean, comic nerd people, like fellow webcomic makers who've read hundreds of webcomic people. But Kiwis by Beat had left a big mark on my life, and I really loved how Copy Rezo had this simple art style but could tell these really emotional stories, and these funny and these heartfelt stories, and capture these everyday moments. Like, Kiwis by Beat had the key to my heart in that moment. And Kiwis by Beat and Ribald Youth. Ribald Youth was the one that really did it, with this kid named Mayu, and she's like a delinquent kid, but she's actually a really good kid. Anyway, not every comic is going to be the same thing to every reader, and it doesn't matter if you put 10 minutes into it, or 100 minutes into it, or 1,000 minutes into it. You pouring more time into it doesn't make it more or less likely to be meaningful and impactful to, your average person reading it. It again just kind of boils down to your work is a key, and it might unlock their heart or it might not. And I had taken it not unlocking people's hearts as I had failed, when I just didn't necessarily find the right people. It's weird when you're making an all ages comic with a young female protagonist, and the type of adventure it isn't necessarily what most people would consider adventure, although by definition it is adventure. And your goals for the story aren't necessarily the same as other more popular webcomics goals for their stories. You're just doing something different. And you're not necessarily going to find your audience the same way that other people find their audiences. And I had a really hard time with that, because I'd had a lot of webcomic friends who told me that you know, when you launch Kara as a webcomic, that's really going to be when you find your audience, and oh, people are going to love it. And they were being really nice, but it just didn't happen that way by a long shot. And it was just really hard for me to deal with. I did better with Kara when it was a print only comic. When I released it as a webcomic and it seemed like nobody cared, that's when I had a hard time. So, you know, it really knocked me for a loop, and it really knocked me down. And then, you know, COVID happened, and a bunch of life stuff happened, and a hurricane happened, and it just was harder and harder to get back to making comics. But it's time to get back to making comics. I miss making comics. I mean, I still make like mini comics and stuff, so I can still call myself a comic artist. But it's time to get back to Kara. At the very least, I need to finish telling Kara's story. So I kind of like glossed over most of the batch painting aspects in this particular field test. I just wanted to talk about like making comics and a little bit about my experiences that I don't necessarily get to talk about a whole lot, because it's more the feelings of making comics and the feelings of feeling like you're screaming into the void or crying into the void or telling your stories into the void, and that can be very painful, and that's something people don't want to talk about because it's not a pleasant thing, it's not an uplifting thing, but it can be a reality for a lot of comic people. Or you just never find your comic tribe, you never find the people who make comics and also like your comic, or you do, but it's not as big as some people's comic tribes. You know, everybody's experiences are different, and it just took me a little bit longer to be okay with the fact that my experiences didn't go the way I thought they were going to go, despite my best efforts. And I think I'm in a pretty good place now, and emotionally regarding this. So I think it's time to get back to making comics, especially because chapter 9 is going to be really cool. There's some great stuff that's going to happen in chapter 9. I'm legit excited and a little intimidated, but mostly excited. And I'm just waiting for some supplies to come in so that I can start the thumbnails, which is the first drawing step. I've had the script and the character designs for a while. So I feel like once I get the thumbnails done, it's not easy writing, but to me, the thumbnails are the boulder up the hill, getting the boulder up to the top of the hill, and the rest of it is just maintaining that momentum. And I can maintain momentum. It's getting that boulder going that's always hard for me. So, I like how I glossed over a lot of the batch painting stuff, but I do have tutorials on batch painting here on the channel. I have tutorials over on my old blog, which, yes, it is starting to rot. Google allowed Blogger and Blogspot to rot, and that's why I quit working on it. Is it just became increasingly more difficult to do what I needed to do on Blogger, but those are still up there if you guys want to check them out. If you're interested in kind of the actual how-to parts of making a comic, or making a comic in batch, or making a watercolor comic, I have blog posts and videos for you guys. They'll be listed in the description below. I have to admit, when I found out how light fugitive these are, I was really disappointed because I really like them. They don't reactivate. They would work really well for comics. You get some really fun color splits. It can be a great way to create an evocative background or an evocative emotional scape very quickly. So it just seems like it could be so good for 7-inch Kara, and I probably will use them from time to time and just kind of try to be sparing. I mean, I also use Opera Rose, and Opera Rose is also very light fugitive on Kara pages. Not all the time, but Naomi wears a lot of Opera Rose, and I do actually use some neons when I'm painting Kara, and those are also very light fugitive. So I'm not adverse to using fugitive paints when painting 7-inch Kara because it lives in a portfolio for the most part. It doesn't see a lot of sunlight. And I mean, the main point of those pages has already been scanned. It's already been lettered. Like, the pages are a beautiful artifact of the finished product. So for me, it's not a deal killer, but it is a big disappointment. It means I'm not necessarily comfortable in using them for other kinds of art pieces. It means that I'm not necessarily comfortable now being able to recommend them. It kind of makes a fool of me for giving them such high praise in the past, although I do have to cut myself some slack. I do always caveat that I am a watercolor comic artist and I'm reviewing these things from a watercolor comic artist's point of view. and I'm not necessarily looking for all the same things that someone who is making art to sell or making art to display would necessarily be looking for. But I do still feel some responsibility for that. So I'm really appreciative that Kimberly Crick Art did do a really full review and provide some great alternatives and some ideas for mixing dupes of some of these colors. I think that's phenomenal. So if you love this and you want a version for display, you should definitely check out her review. Now, there are also a lot of decent, less fugitive supergranulating options from Daniel Smith, who has come under fire for some of their Primatech colors they use the colors they say they're going to, or rather they use the minerals they say they're going to use, but then they add in additional additives, like amethyst includes additional additives to get that really beautiful dark purple color. So I feel like we're really just, a lot of our heroes are falling these couple of years, you know. And Schmincke also has some super granulating options, but I haven't tried the Schmincke yet. I find them to be kind of price prohibitive, and I haven't really enjoyed Schmincke watercolors all that much in the past, so I've been hesitant to try their super granulating colors. And then Roman Schmal's Aquarius line also has some fun super granulating colors. I don't know if those are going to be more light fast than these. So those might give you the look you're going for without the fugitivity issues. I do have like a Daniel Smith super granulating palette that I put together that I'd love to field test for you guys. There's a lot of cool stuff going on there without necessarily the same fugitivity issues. So at some point in the future, I'd like to make my own super granulating splits. There's some colors that would be so fun to have that I haven't seen on the market. I don't want to talk about it too much because I don't want someone else to shark my idea. I mean, if they're going to do it anyway, that's fine. But I don't want someone else to beat me to the punch before I have a chance to do it. So I will let my patrons know about it, and I'll probably let people know on Patreon, but also Discord about it. But I'm going to kind of try to surprise you guys with it, with maybe like a live stream. But here are all of our mini field tests from today. They came out so cute. It's so disappointing that these have the fugitivity issues that they have. And I'm going to lump the Paul Rubens in with the Supervision because, again, they're made by the same company and there's a lot of similarities between them. And I just feel like until we know, it's safer to just assume that there's probably going to be similar issues between the two brands. I really enjoyed getting to ramble to you guys about making comics. I know I kind of harped on like the lower parts, but it's been such a shackle for me to overcome, and it's something I've had to really fight, and I still won't say I've 100% overcome it yet. I won't feel like I've 100% overcome it until I'm probably like halfway through the roughs, or maybe even until chapter 9 is totally done. But there's a big part of me that really misses comics. There's a big part of me that's where my heart is. And while I still read a lot of comics, it's not quite the same to not be working on your passion project, the project that you really love and that you really believe in. So if you haven't read 7-Inch Kara yet, it would really mean a lot to me if you did. You can read it as a webcomic at 7inchkara.com. It's actually been on a quiet hiatus since April. I'm almost at the end of chapter 8 over there, so I kind of figured it was a good time to kind of like slow down with posting so that once I have more pages, I have a bit of a buffer. So if you guys want to read it for free, you can check it out at 7inchkara.com, or if you're a fan of the Dead Tree format like I am, you can find copies of it at 7inchkara.com/shop. I'll have links to everything for you guys down in the description below. And if you guys don't know who Kara is, she is my 7-inch tall Lilliputian main character. So you are looking at her right now. I used her for all of these field tests as my little bitty muse. You guys see her a lot on the channel. And she is an adventurous but lonely spirit seeking friendship and adventure. And like I said, you can read it for free at 7inchkara.com. So I don't necessarily feel like the need to give you guys the big sales pitch because you can find out for yourself. Did you guys know I grew up watching Reading Rainbow? So a big part of my sales pitch is like, go read it for yourself and find out. I I hope you guys found this field test to be helpful and maybe even inspiring. Hopefully I provided some good food for thought. There can be pros and cons to using light fugitive colors because often they give you colors that you would not otherwise be able to have. And if you're working for reproduction and not to sell the piece, then it might be something that's worth it to you. Every artist has different needs, and that's why it's great to have a variety of artists reviewing these kind of art supplies, because you can really get a gamut of needs and opinions that will help you guys decide if these are right for you. So let me know down in the description below if you guys have light fast tested any of these and what your experiences were like in terms of color shift, fading, or just total color disappearance. Let me know if you've also had some of those issues with the tube watercolors. Is this a systemic thing, or perhaps one could almost hope perhaps a flaw in the production line that affected one artist? Yeah, right, to be so lucky. But let me know what your experiences with CAM Supervision Supergranulating watercolors are, as well as some of the other supergranulating watercolors on the market. And let me know what you guys would like to see me review next. I'm gearing up to get back to the student grade showdown. I've got some great, or at least interesting, watercolors that I look forward to exploring with you guys. And cheer me on to start chapter 9. Send me all of your good energy, send me all of your belief so that I can get started and share that with you guys as a big old vlog. I'm really looking forward to it. I'm waiting for those art supplies to come in, and then I'm gonna hunker down at my favorite coffee shop and get to work on thumbnails. So thank you guys so much for hanging out with me. A huge thank you to my amazing patrons on Patreon. Their support makes reviews like this possible because I use the funds from Patreon to buy the supplies that I review for you guys. If you guys would like to see me do that massive light fast test that I hinted at several times during the video, or if you'd like to know more about what that entails, you guys can join me over on Discord in my Discord server, The Paint Box. It's an art-centric and art supply-centric Discord server. You guys will find a link to that down in the description below, or you can join me on Patreon, and once we reach that $500 goal, I'll get started on that massive light fast test for you guys. So I hope you guys have a wonderful day. Huge thanks to these amazing people, and hopefully this was helpful in helping you guys make art a habit. Bye guys!